Well, this time we want to prepare ourselves for our history bit. We love to share with you some things that we believe would be helpful and informational, and that would cause Zion to have a greater awareness of who they are and to have a knowledge of what has happened in the past, and to see how history has impacted us and how having a knowledge of this history has helped us to know who we are and whose we are in Yahshua. Now, today, I want to share a reading from a document I have called The Igbo Religion of Eastern Nigeria. And this particular reading is a 3-page reading that I'm going to share. It's written by a man named Olaudah Equiano. And he wrote this in 1789. Now, just to give you a little background about Olaudah, he was a slave that was taken from the kingdom of Benin. That's what it was called during that time in the 18th century. And he was a slave by the English. He was able to obtain his freedom and became an abolitionist in Britain. One of the reasons why I felt it important to share this piece that he wrote is to show a connection. And before I read it, I want to say that the Almighty made a statement in the scriptures with regard to the house of Israel being scattered throughout all of the nations under the heavens because of the disobedience and breaking of the covenant. And so we know, based upon what the prophets have prophesied, the Israelites have been scattered throughout all the nations. And of course, this began centuries ago, and it continued as centuries moved forward from the time of the 8th century BCE and continuing. That's with the scattering of the 10 tribes in the north, and then also with the southern kingdom, Judah, Yehuda, being removed out of the land in the 1st century, 70 CE, and continuing to be scattered. And so we know that there are Israelites in India, Israelites among the people whom we call the Palestinians. They are blood-descended Israelites of people who stayed there and adopted the religion of Islam over time. We know that there are Israelites in Pakistan and in Burma and all over the world and all throughout the continent that is called Africa, and even among the Native Americans. So we have Israelites scattered. And what I like to do is to provide information with respect to showing who the Israelites are. And so when I have an opportunity to come upon piece of information that helps to establish that connection through history, then I like to share that. And so this particular document that we're looking at today primarily has to do with showing a connection between the Igbo people of West Africa and the so-called African American in the United States of America and also in South America. We have information here based upon this man named Olaudah Equiano. We are going to see him giving a description of his people in the region where the majority of the people were taken and enslaved through the transatlantic slave trade. So now I'm going to go ahead and read the document. Please bear with me in the reading. Might be a little lengthy, it's 3 pages, so I'm going to try and read as quickly as I can to get through it. Religion played a central role in the cultures of West Africa. In this extract, Olaudah Equiano, known in his lifetime as Gustavus Vasa, describes Igbo religion in present-day eastern Nigeria. That's what it's called today, Nigeria. In his time, that area was not called Nigeria. And observes that certain aspects of African religious belief resemble those found in Judaism and Christianity. This passage is from his autobiography, the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa the African, London, 1789. As to religion, this is him writing the document, as to religion, the natives believe that there is one creator of all things, and that he lives in the sun, and is girded round with a belt, that he may never eat or drink. But according to some, he smokes a pipe, which is our own favorite luxury. They believe he governs events, especially our deaths or captivity. But as for the doctrine of eternity, I do not remember to have ever heard of it. Some, however, believe in the transmigration of souls in a certain degree. Those spirits which are not transmigrated, such as their dear friends or relatives, they believe always attend them and guard them from the bad spirits or their foes. For this reason, they always, before eating, as I have observed, put some small portion of the meat and pour some of their drink on the ground for them, and they often make oblations of the blood of beasts or fowls at their graves. I was very fond of my mother, and almost constantly with her, and almost constantly with her. When she went to make these oblations at her mother's tomb, which was a kind of small solitary thatched house, I sometimes attended her. There she made her libations and spent most of the night in cries and lamentation. We compute the year from the day on which the sun crosses the line, and on its setting that evening. There is a general shout throughout the land. At least I can speak from my own knowledge throughout our vicinity. The people at the same time made a great noise with rattles, not unlike the basket rattles used by children here, though much larger, and hold up their heads to heaven for a blessing. It is then the greatest offerings are made, and those children whom our wise men foretell will be fortunate are then presented to different people. They have many offerings, particularly at full moons. I want us to catch this part here because he's going to start describing things that are very similar to Israelite practices. He says the offerings are particularly at full moons, generally at 2 harvests, or generally 2 at harvest, before the fruits are taken out of the ground. And when any young animals are killed, sometimes they offer up part of them as a sacrifice. We practice circumcision like the Jews. Listen to this. And made offerings and feasts on that occasion on the same manner as they did. Like them, like the Jews, also our children were named from some event, some circumstance, or fancied foreboding. At the time of their birth, I was named Olaudah, which in our language signifies vicissitude or fortune, also one favored, and having a loud voice and well spoken. I remember we never polluted the name of the object of our adoration. On the contrary, it was always mentioned with great reverence. And we were totally acquainted, or we were totally unacquainted with swearing. And all those terms of abuse and reproach which find their way so readily and copiously into the language of more civilized people. The only expressions of that kind I remember were, may you rot, or may you swell, or may a beast take you. Let me pause for a moment. Now, this particular section that I just read primarily has to do with the fact that there are practices that the Eastern Nigerians in this land that was called Igbo land were practicing that are Israelite. So much so that there were no terms in their language such as curse words. All right? That wasn't a part of the language. And it also says that they never polluted, where it says they never polluted the name of the object of their adoration. It means that they never took the name of their Elohim in vain. So what he's talking about are these ways among the Igbo that were exactly like the Jews. Now, he's saying this with reference to the fact of Jews that he has come in contact with while being in Britain. I'll keep reading. I have before remarked that the natives of this part of Africa are extremely cleanly. This necessary habit of decency was with us a part of religion, and therefore we had many purifications and washings. Those that touched the dead at any time were obliged to wash and purify themselves before they could enter a dwelling house. Every woman, too, at certain times, was forbidden to come into a dwelling house or touch any person or anything we eat. I was also fond of my mother, so I could not, listen to this, it was always with his mom. So what happened was that when she was unclean, he was also unclean with her. This is what this is saying. It says, I was so fond of my mother, I could not keep from her or avoid touching her at some of those periods, in consequence of which I was obliged to be kept out with her in a little house made for that purpose, till offering was made, and then we were purified. Though we had no places of public worship, we had priests and magicians. The magicians were wise men. I do not remember whether they had different offices, referring to the priests, because they were the same. Priests and the wise men were regarded as the same. Or whether they were united in the same persons. But they were held in great reverence by the people. They calculated our time and foretold events. They wore their beards. Familiar? And when they died, they were succeeded by their sons. Sounds familiar? Most of their implements and things of value were interred along with them. Pipes and tobacco were also put into the graves with the corpse, which was always perfumed and ornamented, and animals were offered in sacrifice to them. None accompanied their funerals, but those of the same profession or tribe. These buried them after sunset, and always returned from the grave by a different way from that which they went. These magicians or wise men were also our doctors and physicians. They practiced bleeding by cupping, and were very successful in healing wounds and expelling poisons. They had likewise some extraordinary method of discovering jealousy, theft, and poisoning, the success of which no doubt they derived from the unbounded influence over the credulity and superstition of the people. I do not remember what those methods were, except that as to poisoning, I recollect an instance or two which I hope will not be deemed impertinent here to insert, as it may serve as a kind of specimen of the rest, and is still used by Negroes in the West Indies. A young woman had been poisoned, but it was not known by whom. The doctor ordered the corpse to be taken up by some persons and carried to the grave. As soon as the bearers had raised it on their shoulders, they seemed seized with some sudden impulse and ran to and fro, unable to stop themselves. At least, after having passed through a number of thorns and prickly bushes unhurt, the corpse fell from them close to a house and defaced it in the fall, and the owner being taken up, he immediately confessed the poisoning. So they somehow were able to find out when people had did things wrong. Last paragraph. Such is the imperfect sketch of my memory has furnished me with of the manner many customs of a people among whom I first drew my breath. And here I cannot forbear suggesting what has long struck me very forcibly, namely, the strong analogy which, even by this sketch, imperfect as it is, appears to prevail in the manners and customs of my countrymen and those of the Jews. Before they reached the land of promise, like the Israelites in their primitive state, our government was conducted by our chiefs, our judges, and our wise men and elders, and the head of a family with us enjoyed a similar authority over his household, which with that which is ascribed to Abraham and to other patriarchs. The law of retaliation obtained almost universally with us as with them. Even their religion appeared to have shed upon us a ray of its glory, though broken and spent in its passage, or eclipsed by the cloud to which time, tradition, and ignorance might have enveloped it. For we had our circumcision, a rule, I believe, peculiar to that people. We had our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washings and purifications on the same occasions as they had. Now, I thank each of you for bearing with me in the reading of this. But this document here provides us with a load of information that Olaudah gave about the people in Nigeria called the Igbo. They had these practices because they were Israelites in the diaspora that did not continue the religious practice having a Bible. So they mixed in some things with the pagan practice and also what was in their culture from the Torah. And we find here this evidence that these people indeed are of Israelite stock. So what that says to us is that the people who were taken and who were enslaved and sent to the Americas and to the European nations as a part of the transatlantic slave trade are people that are of an Israelite stock. And so I think it's important that we be mindful of that. Those of you who did not know that you are of an Israelite stock, I hope that this information has provided an evidence for you to cause you to want to look further into it and to gather more information. Hallelujah. Because as people are finding out who they are as being a part of the house of Israel ethnically, we are seeing the Almighty fulfill his prophetic word in that he said that in the latter days, when Israel would be scattered among the nations and would be practicing the religion of the nations, it said that they would return to Yahuwah and their king being the Messiah, Yahshua. And he is doing that so marvelously in our day-to-day. The Most High be praised.